We're going to move swiftly to our final panel on the role of government, and I'm thrilled to introduce our moderator, Nancy Colleton. Nancy is an internationally known and respected leader in environmental communication and information. As the president of the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, she leads numerous initiatives that promote better understanding of the changing planet. In addition to serving as the deputy chair of the IUCN Commission on Education and Communication, Nancy leads the Alliance for Earth Observations and co-chairs the Environmental Information Services Working Group of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Science Advisory Board. Nancy, welcome to the stage. Thank you so much for moderating our final panel.
If we could have our panelists, the Honorable Sherri Goodman and Assistant Secretary of State Monica Medina, come on up to the stage, that would be fabulous. And Shetta, thank you so much for having me here today. It's an absolute honor, and clearly you consulted my mother in going over my bio. So there were a couple of old things in there, but really what I like to think of myself as is just someone that likes to connect people, that helps to get the messages forward about why it's important to take action. And there were so many incredible people in this room today that talked about that very thing. Enough about me. Let me tell you about these incredible panelists that we have here today. They truly are incredible. And it's hard to follow John Podesta because he has so much energy. But I think these two panelists are up to the challenge. And I say that because I really don't think you can find two better examples of what public service is about, what thinking about outside the box for public policy is about, and certainly what commitment is about. And in addition to that, having known them for many, many years, I can tell you there are no two finer human beings than Sherri Goodman and Monica Medina. So I'd like to first tell you about Sherri's background a bit. She is the Secretary General of the International Military Council on Climate and Security. She also is a senior fellow at the Wilson Center, Wilson Center's Environmental Change and Security Program, and also their Polar Institute. She is credited with coining the phrase threat multiplier, which I like to use early and often. And she is also she was the first Deputy Secretary of Defense, the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security. Monica is as of September, has our new Assistant Secretary of State for Oceans, International and Environmental Scientific Affairs. She is previously the Assistant Secretary and Adjunct Professor, at Georgetown University School of Foreign Policy. She was also a Senior Associate for the Stevenson Ocean Security Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And I think maybe my favorite role for Monica is that she co-founded and was publisher of Our Daily Planet, an e-newsletter on conservation and environment. She also held a critical role at NOAA, where she was the principal Deputy Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere. That's a long title. But let's go ahead and get started and welcome you both. Here we go.
Avi, will you tell John, who's about to leave, ask him to come in for a minute because I'm about to tell a story about him that he'll find very amusing.
You've been requested. There's a story about you about to be told. Just for a moment. Okay.
John, thank you for coming back in, and sorry to interrupt this panel, but before you leave, and because I know so much of the audience knows you and reveres you, and you're about to ask me something about my role in environmental security and climate.
Exactly.
So sitting there listening to you just now, I recalled that back when John was chief of staff to President Clinton. And I was Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security. And my husband at the time was the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Installations and Industrial Affairs, or as they used to say, he closes the bases and I cleaned them up. We spent one Thanksgiving, we were out in California where my husband's family is from, and my husband spent most of it on the phone with John Podesta because was something going on at Miramar that John Podesta wanted John Goodman to take care of like now on Thanksgiving and move that property along and take care of the bases for the communities in California. And yes, and Sherri should get them cleaned up too. So
Save the whales.
that's right, and save the whales along with Monica. So that was, John was always, even back then when he had a zillion things to do, he was always making sure that we were on point, taking care of all the things for the president in an environmentally sound way. So thank you for your leadership and your spirit all these years.
Great. Well, let's get started with our questions. We heard John talk about how we need to look at the global economy, transform it, but so much of that begins with the direction that comes from government. And we're early into this into this administration. We just finished COP26. I'd like to hear from both of you as to what you see as the priorities, the next steps, what needs to happen at this point in time.
I turned on. Yes, good. Well, it's just so nice to be here and to be in this room of friends and leaders. I feel really honored to be sitting on this stage and very lucky to have been nominated by the president and vice president and then confirmed by the Senate for this job. So it's really just a thrill to be at this moment. And it was a thrill to get to do it before the Conference of the Parties occurred. So I was able to be there and help make the point that the U.S. is really back as a government. And let me just say, coming out of that meeting, I've been struck by, even now, weeks later, how much we hear at the State Department that countries were really glad to see us engaged as we were. And I know John, kind of fired us all up, but I'll say the COP fired up our team in the U.S. government. We really came together in a whole of government way. We had 13 cabinet secretaries, the president, my boss, the Secretary of State was there, along with Spec Kerry and his spectacular team. So I think one of the key ways that you know that the government is really engaged is kind of what kind of resources do they put at something. And I will tell you, we just have an A+ team of people working across the government. Every cabinet secretary sees climate as part of their job. And that's really a much different feeling than, back in the days when we were trying to explain what it was and why was Vice President Gore always calling these meetings. What did John Podesta want John Goodman to do? And so it's a whole lot different than it was. That said, we know that the challenges are huge in front of us, and we are working hard. We came up with a ton of new programs and policies and plans, all of which we are really determined to put in place. Things like the methane pledge that John mentioned. There was a forests pledge that was really instrumental, kind of took us to the next level on that. There's the First Movers Coalition of businesses. We joined the Ocean Panel, this high-level group of people determined to make sure that the ocean is part of the climate solution and vice versa. So I feel like we are gaining momentum back after we had lost it in 4 years of sort of being in the wilderness. But it's not going to happen alone. It really is this partnership with all of you and young people who have been at this for a long time, leaders in business, leaders in NGOs. And I think we all know each other well enough now that we really do have the opportunity, the chance to make a big difference right away. And government, at least this Biden administration, is 100% with you. We're determined to show that we're back domestically, but we're also determined to show that we're back in the international community. And so I'm happy to talk about individual programs, but I think really that misses the boat because it's sort of the whole suite of things that we have going. And I know we can sit and talk about whether or not we're at 1.5 or 1.8 or 2.1. And all that matters because we need to be held accountable. But it's an all of us thing that need to be held accountable. It's all of us that have to work at it. And I do feel like we're gaining momentum, and some of the progress that we're making now will accelerate. I'm confident of that. I'm very optimistic about that. So we're in it all the way, all in. 100 days into the administration, we held a leader summit and then just kept going from there. And Spec Carey, I think, was supposed to take some time off, and he immediately turned around and started traveling again, and he's off on the road as we speak, on his way back out to continue to push to get countries, the big emitters, to do their part.
Now, Sherri, is there anything that you want to add about your perspective, not being there as part of the U.S. delegation, but working in the area of defense, which is a big part of this whole of government approach, and how you see COP26 really impacting what that agenda may be?
Sure. Thank you, Nancy. And while climate and security wasn't front and center at the COP itself, there are a lot of ways in which the national security sector, both, of course, is affected by climate change and can help us on the road to net zero and decarbonization. But before I get to some of the specifics of that, I want to tip my hat here to a couple of great people here in the audience who are my colleagues at the Center for Climate Security. Rod Schoonover, who led some of this leading work when he was at the NIC and the State Department, and is now leading our ecological security work. And I know Monica agrees with me, as does Nancy, that the whole biodiversity, biological security, ecosystem security is as important and a big part of what we're trying to address here. And Kate Guy, who now Monica has taken from us into the State Department, but we're very happy for Kate. Kate, along with Steve Brock over there, both led the first World Climate Security Report of the International Military Council on Climate Security. Kate and Steve have both done so much more also in their careers, but they are some of the leaders in this space. And I know, sitting far over there on the right, I'm going to call him out, Colonel Greg Duque, retired, who co-leads the Veterans Advanced Energy Project, among many things he also does. But I say that because in the clean energy transition, as we transform our economy, the workforce is changing, and veterans moving into this space are a big part of the new workforce. And I think that's really important, and that's among the many things that Greg is championing in his own work. So thank you. Now, what can the national security space offer here? And I've been taking a lot this week, as many of you follow all events going on, the First Movers Coalition work. So I'm going to start there because I think there's opportunities as we take these important sectors and try to drive out and decarbonize from steel and cement and shipping and aviation fuel, aviation, and the other sectors that are represented in the First Movers Coalition, to use the buying power of the military in certain of those sectors. Not all of them, but some of them, particularly aviation fuel, electric vehicles. So I think there are some good opportunities there for the for defense to lead by example. And not just in the US, but internationally. Through our International Military Council on Climate and Security, we now have over 35 countries represented, all of which are working to understand and address security risks globally, but also to green their militaries in strategy, practice, and operations. NATO itself has released its own climate strategic plan, and Secretary General Jan Stoltenberg, who was at the COP, is really leading on that. And another area I'd say, which is increasingly important globally, is the integration of climate risk analytics, kind of understanding how climate is affecting everything from your transportation sector, food, agriculture, everything. And the Department of Defense, by working with efforts that Monica, NOAA, NASA, and others are leading in the effort to bring together a holistic approach to climate science and its application, an area I know you've been very much involved in, Nancy, can really help move us more towards a uniform set of climate services that gives us climate metric, climate analytics that are tailored to specific not only specific use cases, but specific sectors. And that's also going to advance the whole climate tech field.
Great. Excellent. Monica, back to you for a little bit of follow-up with hearing what Sherri was just saying about some of the national security aspects and private sector aspects. Could you give us some insight into what you see as the priorities for state and further developing U.S. leadership in this, in the broad climate agenda internationally?
Absolutely. I think it's a really wonderful time for us at state working in this area because it's never been so important. We have a Secretary of State. Not only do we've got two Secretaries of State actually driving this within the State Department, but the Secretary of State Blinken, the Secretary of State, is very focused on this. Everywhere he goes, he gets asked about it. Every bilateral meeting I've ever been in, he talks about it. It's top of the list of his points. I think he sees it as central to our foreign policy. And the biggest challenge for us in the State Department is trying to get the entire State Department, all of it, every bureau, every post, every geographic bureau, every substantive bureau like mine, everybody, the entirety of the State Department really thinking about it that way. And most of them do think about it, but changing the way we do our work is really critical, I think, to that. So it starts with the Secretary bringing it up everywhere he goes, or having it be a central part of his mission. He was in Africa 2 weeks ago. He met with people who were dealing with the terrible droughts there in Kenya, and he's headed out to the Far East next week, and I think he'll hear about it again. So it's not hard to do in sort of the most basic ways, but really changing the architecture of the State Department to make it more integral to what it does. And the Defense Department's this exact same way. I think we're working hard to bring about those big transformational changes that John hinted at, in his speech that will happen in the economy. And so I see it as really fundamental. And the one other thing I'll say, maybe this is anticipating another question, is that I think it also matters to bring up climate in other ways. So not just talking about it as climate per climate straight on, but talking about it as security, talking about it as important for nature and biodiversity, which appeals to a whole lot of people who don't necessarily think about climate every day, but who care about biodiversity and the special places that actually are really critical for making sure that we don't lose more species, that we don't lose more habitat, that we keep the planet functioning, but also will do tremendous things to help our climate work and help us reach those climate goals. I think 30 or 40% of what we need is nature-based solutions. So so I really think a lot about how can I be additive to what Secretary Kerry is doing, what he sees as sort of the big emitters, trying to move the needle the most he can with the fewest number of countries that, really move that needle. And I think about it in the other way. How can I move so many countries who may have the potential to actually benefit us, who may not be big emitters, but who have the potential to really help us change, make the changes that we need. So I hope that helps.
No, that was very, very good. Thank you. And Sherri, building upon what Monica was just talking about architectural changes and transforming how we're doing our climate work to highlight not only other topics like biodiversity, but to help us work more efficiently and effectively. Can you think of, or could you discuss any potential changes that might take place, for example, in defense, or how that could be done where it could be more effective in dealing with climate? Or are you seeing our international partners making any changes that you may have seen through your International Military Council?
Well, let's start with the U.S. The president's executive orders on climate, which he issued within a week of taking office, had a direction to every federal agency and beyond. And some of them were directed particularly at the national security community. So for the first ever national intelligence estimate on climate change has been recently released, and that It mobilizes all 17, now 18 agencies of the intelligence community. The Defense Department issued a very forward-leaning climate adaptation report a few months ago. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you. That has the department really integrating climate considerations both into its supply chains, certainly into making its installations and facilities more resilient to climate impacts, having suffered billion-dollar damages from hurricanes in the last several years, and addressing the readiness impacts to our troops, like extreme heat and having to deploy and train where there are more Black Flag days or in parts of the world where it will be difficult to operate outside for periods of time within the coming years. And then, even more recently, the Department of Defense issued its first ever climate risk analysis, defense climate risk analysis, which I would say goes a long way towards laying out what Monica talked about, essentially the muscle memory, the framework, the muscle memory that the Department of Defense needs to integrate climate into strategy, planning, budgeting, operations, and there's a really well laid out chart there that takes 5 elements and got hundreds of, let's say 40 or 50 different key documents that the Department of Defense produces every year that make the Department of Defense run. And if it's held to account on integrating climate into all of those processes, it will have changed fundamentally how it operates. So that's what's happening now. I assume the same is happening in the State Department, and then across the interagency, particularly with integrating the science from the science agencies into how those measurements and metrics and analytics are used at the operational agencies.
And can I just ask very quickly as a follow-up? I guess I can because I'm the moderator.
You got the power.
Are you seeing those same changes with our allies and in their defense departments making those changes as well, or is this something that the U.S. is at the forefront of?
Well, I think U.S. is among the leaders. I wouldn't say the U.K. is really moving out fast. I mean, the U.K. Is more directly addressing actually emissions reductions from military activities. That's one that's going to be, I think, speaking about that frontally for some militaries will be something that is a challenge to do, but I think being able to count emissions, which is something that the U.S. has already tracked, UK, France, and a number of others, but certainly not a majority yet. That's the place to begin. And I think that's where the NATO Strategic Climate Action Plan really takes a start and says, we're going to start and have a specific method of measuring emissions from military activities. Now, you know, I could give you a whole seminar about how you disaggregate that and count that. We won't do that unless you want to. But that's an important starting point because the military is a big enterprise and it affects many different sectors of society, transportation, logistics, aviation, shipping, blah, 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 not to mention ammunition and the real, heart of warfare. But there are ways to manage this, and there are ways to address it that help us move substantially towards those net zero goals that enable the military to lead by example. And of course, militaries have often been leaders in research and development, and it doesn't only have to be for warfare, it's in technology as well. And we're talking about advanced green, whether it's green energy or advanced climate analytics, all of those are useful tools as we move to decarbonize in our economy before we don't have any more time left.
So can I add that I think it all, when I look at the name of this meeting and this organization, we don't have time. Mm-hmm. I think our whole government effort stems from the fact that our president really believes we don't have time. Mm-hmm. And has said so from the beginning of his campaign. And I think that sends a huge signal to everyone in the government, which is why we had such a huge whole of government approach at COP and not just at COP. I mean, was a reflection of the way we think about these issues in this administration. So I think we have taken the approach that we don't have a lot of time. We are going to try everything that we possibly can. And you see that in the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better bill. You see that in the way we are building our budgets. You see that in the way that cabinet secretaries talk about it everywhere they go. I think it actually even does sort of spill over to the private sector, to the fact that so many corporations showed up at COP and are really thinking hard about what to do. So this, I think John Podesta was right when he said this is a moment, because we have a leader at the top of this entire enterprise that believes that we have to take this moment. And so when I think about it from the State Department's perspective, it's in the G7 statement, it's in the G20 statement, it's at every big international meeting, whether it's a climate meeting or a security meeting or a development meeting. We are talking about it everywhere we go. And I think that helps, but it also isn't enough. Like, we have to actually use these opportunities to really move the needle. He's created the space for us all to do this work. And now it's kind of on all of us to recognize we don't have time and to keep pushing, just the way John said.
Well, speaking of opportunities, I really want to also pursue a line of questioning with you on a topic I know that's very dear to both of you, and that's our oceans. And I know that you both have been just dedicated advocates for the oceans, better understanding what's going on in the Arctic, and so on. And so given that this is a specific, special moment in time, and we don't have much time, would you each elaborate on what you see as the opportunity to finally elevate more research on the oceans, more protection of the oceans, and the important role that the oceans play in this climate scenario?
Well, I'll start. It's great to have oceans in my title. I love that about my job. We have an Our Oceans conference, so thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about the 7th of the series of ocean conferences that Secretary Kerry started when he was the Secretary of State. We're doing another one in February in Palau. The U.S. is co-hosting, and we hope to make climate a theme across the entirety of the conference, which is kind of a new thing. I also think the COPs have helped to focus this, the work in oceans more, but there's just much, much more to do. COP25 was a blue COP. There was some progress there. This COP, we got actual language about oceans and continuing follow-up work on oceans into the text of the agreement, and we'll be talking about oceans at every COP from now on, I believe. But I don't think that's sufficient. We definitely need to be thinking about oceans as a key part of the solutions, and we've only just begun to develop those pathways in the way that, say, forest conservation and forest initiatives have already had a lot of time. Part of that is because people can see trees and they can see the Amazon being cut down. They don't really see the impacts in our oceans as easily. And that's a challenge for those of us who've worked in the ocean space, because it's just this great big flat surface that you can't really see underneath. It's a challenge for us that we need to make much more clear to the public what the stressors are on the oceans, how climate is impacting the oceans, and how the oceans can be a real help in the solutions. We have to describe what that means, whether it's clean energy or using carbon sink capacity or creating marine protected areas. There's a whole host of things that we can and should do more of, and that's part of my job. So it's on me to be part of that solution.
Well, we have faith in you, Monica. I don't think we're prepared to talk about that, but
okay, but that's
perhaps
just the
after-
elephant in the room when we're talking about oceans and we're talking about climate. We have this kind of thing happening, and it's not okay because we're all here for this. And I don't know, you guys are here at the table, so let's get the conversation
Do you know
going.
what she's talking about?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't either, but I'll be happy to take on if the underlying
I can show you the
concern
video.
there is that
I can show it to you.
there can be activities inconsistent with ocean and environmental conservation. You know, our I would say that our military, over the time that I've been associated with it since the 1980s, has really moved from being an environmental laggard to an environmental and clean energy leader. Now, that's not to say that every individual action is always can't be questioned, and I don't know about the particular instance that the speaker is referring to, but I will say, in my time since working with the Department of Defense, it implemented no ocean dumping, no plastic waste at sea, has used its research and development activities to deconflict training activities, impacts on marine mammals, which has been a source of big concern, something John Podesta was very concerned about when he was chief of staff, and he and I and others have served on an ocean commission for a long time, working very hard to address and ensure. In fact, a lot of the research that the Navy and our military does is about better understanding our oceans, so we can do a better job to protect and conserve that, and to ensure that training activities are done as much as possible in areas that don't conflict, particularly with marine mammals. But also, we're in the last decade, something Monica and others have been part of and was very much front and center in the our Oceans Conference that Secretary Kerry has run, is using maritime assets to help track illegal and underreported fishing, which is a scourge around the world, something where our oceans are being rapidly depleted of the primary protein source. And as we have an opening Arctic with fish stocks moving further north, being depleted in certain areas, but moving further north, this becomes ever more important that we understand how that's changing, that we have the observational capability to be able to track that illegal fishing activity, which occurs by many fleets, including China and others around the world, on an increasingly more difficult basis.
And we only have a few minutes left, and perhaps we can talk more offline if you don't mind. But thank you very much for your question. With just a few minutes left, I'd like to ask a closing question for each of you, and that is, you know, you're here representing the international outlook, the State Department, the International Military Council. What are those, like, what is the top priority you think that we should be looking at over the next year or several years that you see a lot of momentum behind, where we can see real change?
Boy, I think it's continuing to focus our efforts, and I would say keep holding us accountable. All of us, in every respect, in all our jobs. That's our job as government servants. We are here to serve the public and to be accountable. I think there are decisions made every day that are trade-offs, and they're hard. They're really hard. And we continue to try to do the best job that we can in balancing things and protecting our country, and yet making sure that we're not doing harm that we don't absolutely need to do in order to keep our defenses strong. And our reputation depends on it. You know, we have to keep our word as a country. So, but to get to your question, I think the most important thing we can do is really implement the programs that we've put out there. We used a lot of our imagination and creativity to come up with innovative ways to really move the needle fast. I think Secretary Kerry is really focused on the big emitters because we can do the most in the shortest amount of time, and he's not stopping. But I also think there's a whole lot of new and innovative things we need to do to bring oceans into the equation, to do more with nature-based solutions, to help with adaptation, to use our science and technology and follow the science to figure out what are the best things that we can do. And so it's not any one thing, it's keeping our foot on, sorry to use a bad metaphor, but keeping our foot on the gas pedal, just not letting up, really, just not letting up. And
the hydrogen pedal.
The electric car gas pedal. Truly, if we don't, we won't make the progress we can in the administration that we have. You know, we can never think past 4 years of an administration, and President Biden, from the time he was a candidate, said we're going to do as much as we can, as fast as we can. So we don't have time, and I think that's key, keeping that in mind.
Okay. Well, you know what? I spent 8 years as the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security. And when I left, my team put together what they thought were the top 10 accomplishments we'd had in those 8 years. And number one was creating environmental security metrics and measures. Now, that sounds really boring. Like, what does my mother care about that, you know? But I'll tell you why it matters, because all of you who are in business, and I heard some of you speak earlier, and you talked about how you've got to change how the business process works, the systems work, the demand signal, whether it's a consumer demand or whether it's the warfighter demand. That all happens through directives, measures, metrics, merits. I was talking about how do you change all the processes within defense. That's what's happening now, and that moves the largest industrial organization in the world. And there's a lot of buying power in certain sectors, not all, certain sectors, and it can lead by example. So I think that's what's happening now. I think the security community has been on this case since we identified it as a threat multiplier 15 years ago, but it hasn't had the push that it now has to really get things done. And I'm very excited about the opportunities to really change both our energy, our economic, and our people, our human systems for the better in the very near future, because we don't have time.
And I'm very excited to watch all of this change unfold as well, but I'm also very appreciative to both of you for taking your time to be here today and for sharing your insights with us, and to all of you for staying for this afternoon session. And with that, we'll please thank our panelists, and we'll hand it back over to Sherri.
And leading the charge on climate action.